My name is Nadia Osei, and I am 39 years old. And last week, my brother called me to ask if I was hiring. I want to start there because that is where the story becomes visible. But I need you to understand the 20 years that preceded that phone call, because without the 20 years, the call is just a phone call. With the 20 years, it is the specific and complete arrival of something that has been building for a very long time. I was called the failure for the first time when I was 19 years old and had told my family that I was leaving the business degree program I'd enrolled in because I had decided it was not the direction I wanted to go. I had a different direction. I wanted to build something in the creative and digital space, and in 2005, that was not a direction that families like mine had a framework for, and the absence of a framework was interpreted as the absence of a future. My father said, "You are making a mistake." My mother said, "Nadia, we are worried about you." My brother Marcus, who was 23 and already in his second year of a corporate finance role that my parents described to everyone they knew with the specific pride of people who have produced evidence of their own correctness, said nothing directly. He did not need to. The family's position was clear, and he was its living embodiment. I was the cautionary tale, Marcus was the proof. That was the structure, and it held for 20 years with the specific durability of structures that nobody examines, because examining them would require the people inside them to acknowledge that the structure was a choice rather than a fact. Before I tell you what Marcus said when I answered that call last week, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you are when you listen to this. Now let me tell you about the 20 years. The 20 years were not what my family thought they were. I want to be clear about that, because the story of a person called a failure who is secretly succeeding ends to get told as if the success was always visible to the person doing it and the family was simply too blind to see. That is not accurate. The early years were genuinely hard. I am not going to pretend otherwise because pretending otherwise would be dishonest, and dishonest is not the thing I am trying to be here. The first 3 years after leaving the degree program, I built two things that failed. Not spectacularly, quietly, the way most early ventures fail, which is that they simply stop having enough momentum to continue, and you close them without a press release, and you sit with the failure privately, and you decide what you learned, and you begin again. My family did not know about the failures specifically because I had not told them and because they had not asked. They had assumed failure in the general sense from the beginning and had stopped tracking specifics. When I came home for Christmas in those early years, the questions were always the same. Have you found anything stable? Are you thinking about going back to school? Your cousin is doing very well at his firm. Have you thought about that kind of path? I answered the questions with the minimum information required to end them and went back to what I was doing, which was building. The third thing I built did not fail. It grew slowly, in the specific, unglamorous way that real growth works, through consistent work and clear thinking and the willingness to make decisions that other people would have found too risky and that I found simply necessary. By the time I was 30, I had 12 employees. By 34, I had 28. By 37, I had moved to a proper office space in the city and had hired a management team and had begun the process of opening a second location. I had not told my family any of this, not as a strategy, because they had not asked, and because the last time I had tried to explain what I was building, my father had said, "That sounds interesting, but what happens if it does not work out?" After that, I stopped explaining. I just worked. My company was featured in a publication my father read every Sunday morning when I was 38. I found out he had seen it from my cousin, who texted me a screenshot of the feature with the message, "Did you see your dad's face at church this morning when someone mentioned it?" I had not been at church. I had been at work. I said, "What did his face do?" She said, "It did something complicated." I said, "I bet it did." Marcus lost his position in October. I knew before he called me because my mother had called my aunt, who had called my cousin, who had texted me, because that is how information moves in our family, through the lateral network of women who actually talk to each other, rather than through the direct channels that should exist, but often do not. I had known for 3 weeks that Marcus's company had done a restructuring and that his division had been significantly reduced and that his position had been among those eliminated. I had known and I had said nothing, and I had not called and I had not offered, and I had simply waited because some things require waiting, and this was one of them. He called on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a meeting when his name appeared on my phone and I stepped out because family calls during meetings are the kind of thing you step out for, regardless of the complexity of what you are stepping away from. I answered in the corridor outside my conference room, with the sound of my team continuing the discussion visible through the glass behind me. He said, "Nadia." His voice had the specific quality of a man who has rehearsed what he is going to say and is delivering it carefully. I said, "Marcus." He said, "How are you?" I said, "I am well." He said, "I heard your company is doing well." I said, "It is." He said, "I have been meaning to reach out." He said it with the particular construction of a man who is aware of the irony of the sentence and is hoping it does not land too visibly. I said, "I know." He said, "I am in a transition." His company had restructured. He was looking at new opportunities. He had heard I was growing, and he wanted to know if there was anything available. I stood in the corridor outside my conference room, and I thought about 20 years. I thought about the back table at his wedding. I thought about the Christmas questions. I thought about the 3 weeks since I had known about the restructuring, and what I had done with those 3 weeks, which was think very carefully about exactly what I was going to say when this call came, because I had known it was coming, and I had decided that I was going to be ready for it in a specific way. I said, "Marcus, I would like to have a conversation with you. Not today." He said, "Of course." I said, "I want you to come to my office. I want you to see what we do and what we have built, and then I want to have an honest conversation." He said, "Okay." He said, "When?" I said, "Thursday." He said, "I will be there." I said, "I know you will." Marcus arrived at my office on Thursday at 10 in the morning. I want to tell you about his arrival because the arrival is its own small story. He came through the front entrance of a 4-story building in the business district of a city he had not known I had an office in, and he spoke to the receptionist, a young woman named Claire, who had been with me for 3 years and who knew everyone and everything. And he said he was there to see Nadia Osei. Claire said, "Of course, she is expecting you. Let her know you are here." She called my office and said, "Your 10 o'clock is here." I said, "Send him up." He rode the elevator to the 3rd floor where my office was. He walked past the open plan workspace where 37 people were working. He walked past the conference room where 2 of my managers were presenting to a client on a video call. He walked past the wall where we had framed the publication feature that had run the previous year. He stopped at the feature. I know because Claire texted me. He stopped at the article. I texted back, "I know." When he came through my office door, I was at my desk reviewing a financial projection. I looked up, he looked at me, and he looked at the office, and he looked at me again, and I watched his face do the thing that faces do when they are recalibrating something significant. I said, "Sit down, Marcus." He sat. I said, "Can I get you anything?" He said no. I said, "Okay." I closed the projection on my screen. I looked at him. He looked at me. He said, "Nadia, I had no idea." I said, "I know." He said, "Why did you never say anything?" I said, "Because every time I tried to say something, the family was very busy telling me what I was doing wrong." He did not have an answer for that. I did not need him to. He said, "I am sorry." He said it the way people say things when they have been sitting with them for 3 weeks and have had time to understand the full shape of what they are sorry for. I said, "I know you are." I said, "I believe that." I said, "Marcus, I want to tell you something before we talk about the job." He said, okay. I said, I did not build this company to prove anything to the family. He said, then why? I said, because it was what I was supposed to do. I said, I knew that at 19 when everyone else was deciding what I was and what I was not, and I have known it every day since. He said, I should have known it too. I said, yes, you should have, but you did not, and that is the conversation we needed to have before the other one. We talked for 2 hours. Not about the job for most of it, about the 20 years, about what they had looked like from his side and from mine, and about the specific way family narratives operate, how they get established early and calcify, and become the thing that is true because everyone has agreed it is true, rather than because it actually is. Marcus said, I think I believed it because it was easier than questioning it. I said, I know. He said, I should have looked closer. I said, yes. He said, I was so busy being the successful one that I did not notice I was not actually paying attention to anything real. I said, Marcus, what are you actually good at? He looked slightly surprised by the question, not because it was difficult, because it was direct in a way our conversations had never been. He told me he was good at financial strategy and at managing complex client relationships and at the specific kind of problem solving that comes from 20 years of working inside large organizational structures and understanding how they move. I said, those are real skills. He said, I know. I said, I have a role that those skills are relevant to. He said, I thought you might. I said, I want to be clear about something first. He said, okay. I said, if you come to work here, you come as an employee, not as my brother. The family dynamic does not come through the door with you. He said, understood. I said, I will hold you to exactly the same standard I hold everyone else. He said, I would not expect anything different. I said, and if it does not work out, I will tell you directly and it will not be personal. He said, okay. He said, Nadia, can I say something? I said, yes. He said, I am proud of you. He said it the way people say things when they are not sure they have the right to say them and are saying them anyway because not saying them would be a different kind of wrong. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, I know. I said, I have been proud of myself for 20 years and I did not need external confirmation to keep going. He said, I know. He said, I just wanted you to know I see it now. I hired him. Not immediately. I ran him through the same process as every other candidate because I had meant what I said about the standard, and the standard meant the process. He came through it well. He started 6 weeks after the Thursday meeting. Deep breath. He has been good at the role, genuinely good. Not because he is my brother, because the skills he described were real, and the motivation that comes from understanding what humility actually costs is a specific kind of useful that 20 years of being the golden child had not produced in him before. My parents found out about the company through the natural, eventual process of family information arriving where it was always going to arrive. My mother called and said, Nadia, your father and I have been looking at your company online. I said, and? She said, we are so proud of you. I said, I know. I said, I have always known what I was building. She said, I think we could have been more supportive. I said, yes, you could have. She said, I am sorry. I said, I know. I said, Mom, it is okay. She said, it is not okay. I said, you are right, it is not, but it is done, and what I built is built, and what comes next is what matters. Emotional pause. She said, you sound like your grandmother. I said, I will take that. If you have been the family failure for longer than you deserve to have been for, this story is for you. Build anyway. Build quietly. Build completely. And when the phone rings and the person on the other end needs something from what you built, decide with full information and clear eyes what you are willing to give and what it's going to cost them and whether you are the kind of person who gives it anyway. I am. That's my story. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.